I sublet a rental cabin for a couple months in 2023 when I needed to move out due to personal issues with my father. The actual renter, whom I'll refer to as my landlord, was also dealing with their own troubles, leading them to vacate the apartment. The cabin was a self-contained unit rented month to month, which worked well for my temporary situation. It had 2 floors, a small kitchen, a decent-sized living space, and an upstairs bedroom accessed by a quirky hatch-style door. I had already paid the rent for the second month, so I was fully settled in by that point. The cabin was situated at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by a few other similarly sized cabin-style houses. As far as I could tell, one of the neighboring houses was vacant, as I never saw any cars or lights. I didn't know my neighbors, but I assumed they were home in the other cabins. It was one of those nights where I'd worked a long 12-hour shift and was completely exhausted by the time I got home. I made a quick peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake for dinner, then headed straight to bed. Before falling asleep, I always made sure to shut the door in the floor, which led upstairs to the bedroom. I've always felt uncomfortable with the entrance to the bedroom being a door in the floor. There's something about it that makes me feel exposed and vulnerable, especially since it doesn't have a lock. This cabin was designed for a single person or a couple, so the unusual layout stood out. As I was watching TV in bed, I suddenly heard a voice from below saying, "Who's up there?" My heart instantly skipped a beat, and I sat up straight, unsure if the voice came from inside the house or outside. I quickly turned off the TV and crawled over to the circular window above the bed, but couldn't see anyone in the darkness. I called out, "Who's there?" but was met with deafening silence. Feeling uneasy, I got up and placed my hand on the handle of the door in the floor, slowly lifting it to peek down the staircase. In a moment of panic, I called out my dad's name, thinking perhaps he had come by. But there was no response. Feeling increasingly scared, I cautiously made my way downstairs, and as soon as I reached the bottom, I quickly flicked on the nearest light switch. The living room illuminated as expected, but in the back of my mind, I knew there wasn't actually anyone down there. I was still convinced it must have been someone from outside. To be sure, I turned on the front porch light and checked the windows, but saw no one. Thoroughly confused, I turned off the living room light and climbed back upstairs, shutting the door in the floor behind me. At this point, I was wide awake and on edge. I turned the TV back on, but not even 5 minutes later, I heard loud pounding on the bedroom door from below. The sounds were aggressive, as if intended to scare me. Any remaining doubt was erased. There was someone in the house. This time, I left the TV on, but remained completely still, paralyzed by genuine fear. The scariest part was that the intruder could easily open the door, as there was no lock. I laid silent for about 20 minutes, and once I felt able to move, I searched for my phone, but couldn't find it on the nightstand. I suspected I may have left it downstairs. Mustering my courage, I opened the bedroom door and looked down the stairs. The flickering TV light allowed me to see just a bit down the stairs to the living room below. I descended quietly, and instead of turning on any lights, I ran out the back door barefoot and sprinted to the nearest neighbor's house, where I knew someone was home. I saw the neighbor's lights were on, so I frantically knocked on their door. Suddenly, I noticed someone watching me from the window next to the door. I yelled through the glass, explaining that I was a neighbor in need of a phone to call the police. But the person just stared at me silently, which unsettled me greatly. As I backed away from the door, I glanced around the road and saw no other houses with their lights on. In that moment, a worrying thought crossed my mind. What if the unresponsive neighbor was somehow involved in the intruder at my house? I went back to my rental through the closed back door. Once inside, I locked the door and turned on every light in the small house, searching for an intruder as well as my missing phone. Finally, I found the phone in the center console of my car. I must have left it there earlier when I was too tired to notice. With the TV still on upstairs, I climbed the stairs back to the bedroom. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a man sitting on my bed, staring at the TV. I screamed, and he slowly turned to look at me. Without another glance, I ran back down the stairs, out of the house, and called 911 from the safety of my locked car. While on the line with the dispatcher, I saw someone moving through the backyard, disappearing into the woods. I relayed what I had seen to the 911 operator, and shortly after, a police car arrived. The officer checked the house and upstairs room, then asked if I had another place to stay for the night. Swallowing my pride, I agreed to spend the night at my father's house. The next day, I returned to the house, packed some essentials, and stayed one more night before collecting the rest of my belongings. Luckily, the landlord agreed to refund me a portion of the rent. When the landlord asked about the intruder's appearance, they didn't press me further, which struck me as odd. The whole situation felt unusual, from the creepy neighbor's unresponsiveness to the landlord's sudden eagerness for me to move out. I couldn't help but wonder if these elements were somehow connected, or if I was simply overthinking it. It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. in 2013, and I was walking home from work down a dimly lit street in my small town in southern Indiana. With my car in the shop, I had been forced to make this 3-mile trek home every day, though it was barely an hour's walk. At this hour, there was rarely any traffic, save for the occasional trucker heading to Indianapolis. As I turned onto a dirt road about a mile into my journey, I continued on. It was a dark, quiet night as I made my way home down the secluded dirt roads that led to my house in this small, southern Indiana town. My car had been in the shop, so I had been forced to walk this 3-mile route every evening after work. As I turned onto the dirt road leading to my home, I heard the faint sound of a motor in the distance. Glancing back, I spotted a van slowly approaching without its headlights on. At first, I didn't think much of it. My town had a used car lot that often sold vehicles with faulty parts. But as the van neared the turn to my road, it suddenly sped up with its lights blazing. Then, just before reaching the turn, the van's lights went dark once more as it slowed down. Now deeply unsettled, I quickened my pace down the dirt road, constantly glancing back to see if I was being followed. My fears were soon realized as I saw the van turn onto the same road I was on. Panicked, I broke into a run, hearing what sounded like a gunshot in the distance. Without looking back, I darted into the surrounding woods and hid behind a large boulder. To my horror, I then heard the voices of what seemed to be a middle-aged man and several young girls searching for me. Doing my absolute best to remain silent and hidden, I waited, terrified of what they might do if they found me out here alone. My heart raced as I heard the man say, "Whoever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight." What kind of twisted cult was this? Were these girls kidnapped? Would I be forced to join them? Huddled behind the rock, I waited in agonizing silence, fearing any sound. Then, to my relief, I heard the distinct sirens of police nearby. Cautiously peeking out, I saw the flashing lights just outside the forest. Mustering my courage, I ran out, screaming for help. The officers approached me, asking if I knew about a body. Confused, I followed their gaze to the horrific sight before the patrol car, the naked, lifeless form of a young woman. The sight before me was gruesome, the woman's body, bloodied and mutilated. The van had vanished. I quickly recounted the evening's events to the officers, describing the suspicious vehicle, the unsettling voices, and the disturbing mention of drinking blood. The kind officers drove me home, but I couldn't sleep, anxiously watching out the window. There it was, the same van, creeping down the street with its lights off. I immediately called the police, providing the license plate number. When the officers arrived, the van had disappeared. But what they told me next would haunt me. The license plate belonged to a vehicle reported missing weeks earlier, its owner found dead under mysterious circumstances. The license plate was registered in South Dakota, but the officers discovered other precincts had reported similar sightings of the suspicious van across the country, in Vermont, Nevada, Alaska, and Texas. They promised to follow up, but I never heard from them again. While I don't believe in the paranormal, my best guess is that this was the work of some sort of cult, using fake plates to carry out their disturbing activities across multiple states. I've since moved out of Indiana, but the experience has made me hyper-vigilant. Now, if I ever witness anything remotely suspicious, I don't hesitate to get to safety immediately. My wife and I live a typical suburban life. Normal jobs, normal neighbors, the standard American dream. I'm certainly not a writer, but what happened recently is something we still can't explain, and it continues to terrify us. My wife Gianna and I had a typical day. After work, we decided to go out for a bite, returning home around 9 p.m. As usual, we didn't stay up too late on a weeknight. By 9:30, we were winding down for the night, brushing our teeth and getting ready for bed. We were usually asleep by 11 p.m., either reading or watching a show. That night, we had settled in to watch our usual program. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet of our evening routine. Gianna advised against answering, reminding me that calls this late at night were rarely good news. I agreed with her logic, but couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it could be an emergency. Deciding to err on the side of caution, I reached over to the bedside table to pick up the receiver. However, before I could lift it, the ringing stopped. That old landline phone was notoriously finicky. By the time the caller had hung up, the call history would have disappeared from the caller ID. Oh well, probably just a wrong number. But just a few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the screen displayed unknown number. Gianna and I exchanged a puzzled look. Calls from unknown numbers, especially past 10 p.m., were highly unusual. We generally had an unspoken understanding that after 9 o'clock, any phone calls were likely to be important or urgent. I hesitated to answer, but the phone kept ringing insistently. A growing sense of unease settled over me. What if it was a family emergency? Steeling myself, I picked up the receiver. On the other end was the gruff voice of our neighbor, Al. "Hey, do you know there's a man standing out in front of your house?" he asked abruptly, before immediately hanging up. Gianna's face drained of color as I relayed Al's strange message. "Don't go out there," she pleaded, her voice laced with fear. But I knew I had to at least take a look, if only to put our minds at ease. Slowly, I made my way to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. I went downstairs to investigate, carefully peeking through the curtains. There was no one on the front lawn. Stepping outside, I scanned the area and the surrounding bushes. Still no sign of anyone. Feeling a bit annoyed that Al would prank call us this late on a work night, I returned to the bedroom and assured Gianna that there was no one out there. "Probably just Al messing with us," I told her. Gianna was just as perplexed as I was by Al's strange behavior. I decided to call him back, but it went straight to voicemail. As I left a message asking him to explain, the phone rang again, another unknown number. This time, when I answered, Al calmly told me to go outside. There was someone standing in front of the house. Confused and unsettled, I told Gianna to stay put as I went to investigate. Peering through the curtains, I finally spotted a figure standing at the end of our walkway by the sidewalk. The figure had a hooded jacket obscuring their face. I felt unsettled as I stepped outside and asked if I could help them. The person simply stood still. Reluctantly, I threatened to call the police. Just then, the house phone rang. Checking the caller ID, I saw it was Al's number. I answered, and he sounded confused, saying he hadn't called me. I told him about the strange calls and the person outside, but he insisted he hadn't made those calls. Al sounded even more confused than I was. Moments later, he claimed he didn't see anyone outside my house. I went to check the window, but the figure had vanished. I demanded Al tell me if this was some kind of prank, warning that there would be consequences if it wasn't. Al insisted he was being truthful. He wasn't the kind of person to play immature pranks. I put him on speaker so Gianna could vouch that we had received the strange calls supposedly from him. Al did the same, having his wife corroborate his story. In the end, there was little more he could say. Besides confirming he wasn't behind the calls, there was little else Al could say. We eventually hung up, but I remained deeply unsettled. I went downstairs one last time to hang up the phone and glanced outside again. The mysterious figure had vanished. To this day, we've never been able to make sense of the unexplainable situation.
Hello.